Now, next story is quite exciting. It's about a boy called Fritz. This story was set in Germany. Germany wasn't a country until about the 1860s. It was all a group of little city-states and princedoms. And so Fritz lived in Bavaria. Bavaria is still an area of Germany today, but it used to be a princedom, a prince ruled. And this particular prince, way back about 200, 300, 400 years ago, he had a castle. But sadly, the castle was under an evil spell because, unfortunately, the prince was a gambler. He liked playing cards. And, well, he played cards with a wizard once, and he lost. And the wizard had enchanted the castle as a punishment because the prince had no money to pay him. And the spell was only to be broken when one young single man could spend an entire night in the castle and come out alive. Well, it was the talk of the whole of Bavaria that the prince's castle was haunted by terrible beasts and a terrible giant and enchanted furniture and all sorts of horrible things. But many young men had tried to stay in the castle overnight because they knew that the prince's treasure had been hidden there. In fact, it wasn't his treasure, it was his late father's treasure, and it was all locked up and he couldn't get to it. He just had to hope that somebody would be able to stay there, but nobody ever had. So many young men had died trying. But Fritz was a strange boy. He was the youngest of his family, and he wasn't scared. It's not that he could feel scared. He wasn't able to feel any sort of fear at all. Nothing frightened him. But this bothered him because his sisters, they would see a spider and they would shake and they would say, "Oh, horrible spider! Please, Fritz, get rid of the spider." Fritz liked insects, so he would put the spider in a jar and take them outside. And he said, "Why do you shiver and shake so much? I wish I could. I'm not frightened. I'm not scared." And eventually, his sisters married, his older brothers left for adventures, and he was the last in the house. And his mother and father said, "Well, Fritz, you're going to have to go out in the world and find your fortune because that's what we expect you to do." And his father asked, "Fritz, what would you most like in all the world to be able to do?" And he said, "Father, I want to be able to shiver and shake. I've never been able to. I'm not scared of anything." "Oh dear," said his father, "you must want an ambition better than that. Gold, or to be captain of a navy, or be a great warrior." "No, father, I just want to know how to shiver and shake." "Oh, Fritz, you are absolutely ridiculous," said his mother. "Now tomorrow I'm going to make you a packet of food that will last you for a week, and then you can earn your own way. There's 1 gold coin, and that should keep you going for a wee bit till you find yourself a job." So, next day, Fritz was sent out on the way, and he decided that he would head north towards Prussia. That was the next small kingdom above Bavaria. And so off he went. Now, he had quite a good time. He met some interesting people, chatted to some travellers on the road, and then he realised that he was coming to the city where the prince's castle was. And he'd heard the stories, and he thought, scary monsters, scary giants, people have died of fright. Maybe it'll make me shiver and shake. So, it was several days he'd been on the road, so he stopped at an inn that was within sight of the castle. that belonged to this prince who lost a bet and had an enchantment put on his castle. And he went to the tavern and he put his gold coin on the table and he said, "I'd like a bed for the night, please, and some supper." And the landlady said, "Of course you may." And eventually, after all the other travellers had gone to bed, he was still speaking to the landlady and her husband. And he told them about his ambition to learn to shiver and shake. And they laughed, but they said, "Well, there's no more sure way of shivering and shaking than to go and stay in the prince's castle one night. But I'm afraid we don't think you should because, well, nobody's ever managed it yet. They all end up dead. And you seem like a very nice boy, Fritz. No, you should go on your travels and go to Prussia and get a job, do something. But no, don't do that." "But I love to learn to shiver and shake. I can't. I want to know." Well, the couple said, "Look, go and sleep on it. And if you're that determined, we'll tell you what to do." So, next day, breakfast, big plate of eggs and sausages and bacon and beans. The landlady really surpassed herself. But it's because she kind of guessed that Fritz would definitely want to go to the castle. And she thought, well, the boy better have a very good last meal. Anyway, so they said, well, the prince, he is living in the gatehouse because obviously with the castle being enchanted, he can't stay there. You go there and you speak to him and you tell him you want to take up his challenge of staying in the house. So he does that and takes him a bit of time to get there. So it's actually nighttime again before he gets there because he's gone round the local market and all the rest of it. And he knocks on the door of the gatehouse and a man in very beautiful clothes, sort of velvet coat with lace cuffs and lace collar and a little circlet of gold on his head. And Fritz thought, this must be him. And he said, "Are you His Highness, the Prince of Bavaria?" "Yes, I am." "And are you here to try the challenge to break the spell on my castle?" "Yes, I am. And I really can't wait to do it because all I ever wanted in life is to learn how to shiver and shake." "Really? Are you sure? You seem a very nice young man. People keep coming and trying this challenge and they end up dead. You do know that there are hellhounds and a big giant and an enchanted bed in the castle. The wizard put all this in to stop people from being able to lift the spell. I can't feel fear. This is why I don't know what shivering and shaking is about. Please let me try. I want to do it. I want to help you. Sounds fun." "Very well," said the prince. "My servant here will take you up to the gates and let you in. And he'll show you where you can sleep and where you can get somewhere to eat and where there's logs for the fire." So Fritz did this and he was absolutely bowled over this beautiful castle. It was absolutely fabulous, and turrets and everything. But the castle seemed sad and dark and gloomy because all the servants, of course, had left and the prince's siblings, they'd gone away. They just didn't want to be there anymore because it was too scary. And so the prince's personal servant, the manservant, told Fritz, "Well, there's a big kitchen and you can make a fire. There's logs in the corner. You can make a fire there. And there's, you can sleep in the kitchen if you like. It's nice and warm once you get the fire going. And there's food in the cupboards and all the rest of it. So, suit yourself and I'll see how you get on. But honestly, I don't think you should do this. Nobody's ever managed before." I'll do it. I'm sure I will." And so anyway, Fritz goes into the beautiful big castle kitchen, big stone walls and this huge big stone fireplace and the grate for the logs. And so he builds up the fire, and he's quite practical as Fritz. He can do practical things. He sets the fire going, and it's getting really, really cold. And so he pulls his bench right up to the fire, and he takes a poker so he can make sure the logs don't fall off the grate and that there's not going to be any damage done. And then, as it gets really pitch dark outside, he hears this scrabbling noise. And it's so dark, and he's only got the glow of the fire in front of him because he's not lit any lanterns or anything. And they're scrabbling. And he looks around, and he sees 2 pairs of red eyes, and then a pair of glowing white eyes. And he realizes these are creatures. And they're not normal creatures. They're gigantic cats and dogs. And he's never seen cats and dogs like this before. They're the size of horses. They're huge. And the dogs have red, staring eyes, and their teeth are dripping with saliva. And the cats have giant, silvery, steely claws. And they're meowing and growling, and really, they look like they're about to attack. But Jack just picks up his poker and he said, "Hey, enough! If you're cold, just sit and warm yourself. No nonsense." "Meow," said the cats, and "meow," said the dogs, the hellhounds. And that was how it carried on through the rest of the night. If the dogs or the cats got antsy or started to paw at Fritz, he would point the hot poker at them and warn them that they were going to get hurt if they didn't behave, and he didn't want to hurt them. So they would sit round the fire and keep warm, if that's what they wanted. And so all these creatures, for the first time in their lives, were frightened of a human. And they sat down in the dark. And it warmed up the room quite nicely with all these furry creatures. And Jack lay down on the bench and went to sleep. Well, next morning, the servant came in, and he came into the kitchen, and he saw Fritz lying on the bench, and he said, "Oh, the poor boy, he's died of fright in the night." And he came up and he pushed Fritz, and Fritz woke up and he said, "Oh, good morning." "Oh, you made it through the night?" "Well, yes, of course I did. I just went to sleep. The cats and the dogs, they were a bit moody, but they behaved themselves. They're fine, but they've all gone now. All disappeared." "That's amazing. I think you're the first person ever to have survived these unearthly creatures. Well, come and have breakfast with myself and the prince." And so the prince was amazed. Next night, Fritz decided to try the next challenge. And he was in the kitchen again, and this time he actually made a meal. And then, no cats or dogs this time. But before he lit the fire, he'd lit lanterns round about. Before he lit the fire, a huge, big pair of legs appeared. Legs with feet. Big, horny-toed feet. And then, attached to the legs was a great big body and long arms. And then the most ugly face of the giant who'd come down the chimney and appeared in the hearth. And Fritz just looked at him and he said, "Oh, good evening. You're very lucky that I hadn't set the fire going. That was very foolish of you. Now, please, take a seat or I get the fire going." Fritz was not at all frightened. And the giant was quite annoyed. He's like, He couldn't really speak in any language. It didn't sound like German, didn't sound like English. And Jack said, "Well, what will we do to pass the time since you're here?" "I know, let's play a game." The giant made noises, and he put his hand up the chimney, and pulled down several skulls and lots of bones. "Ah," said Fritz, "you want to play skittles? What a great idea." And so Fritz set up the bones like you would set up skittles, and they used the skulls as bowling balls. And the giant was quite bad-tempered, but Fritz wouldn't let him cheat and made him stick to the rules. And by the early hours of the morning, Fritz was quite tired, and he said, "I'm going to sleep. I don't know about you, but good game, and I've enjoyed our evening. Good night." And he just lay down and went to sleep. Well, the next morning, when the servant arrived in the daylight, he saw Fritz lying on the bench asleep, and he thought he was dead, but he shook him, and of course Fritz woke up again. He said, "Oh, I've had an interesting night. I played skittles with a giant. He was quite bad-tempered, but I didn't let him cheat." "Amazing," said the servant. And Fritz came with him to go and have breakfast with him and the prince. And the prince was amazed at the story of the skittle-playing giant. Well, one last challenge. The enchanted furniture. And he said, "I don't know what happens, but there are very strange things that happen to the furniture, particularly the beds. So try that." And 3 nights, that was what the wizard said. If you could spend 3 nights there and survive all his tricks, then he would remove the spell. So this time, the servant took Fritz up to the master bedroom, where the prince himself used to sleep. "There's the bed," he said. "Have a good night." And so Fritz thought, "Ooh, looks like a nice bed." It was a 4-poster, and it had beautiful silk drapes, and there was a lovely thick quilt on it. And so Fritz washed his face, put on his pyjamas, got in the bed. And he was just about to fall asleep, and he felt the bed rock and move, and he thought, "Ooh." And the bed lifted itself up and rushed through the doorway and into the corridors. "Wow," said Fritz. And it started to run along the corridors and fly at top speed. And it went past all these rooms and upstairs and downstairs, and Fritz saw amazing things in the rooms. He saw the lost treasure of the prince's late father, and he saw pearls and marble statues and rubies and diamonds and gold coins. And eventually the bed went flying up to the very top of the castle and sat on the window of the turret and was about to throw Fritz right out to his death when the sun came up. And as soon as the sun came up, the bed's enchantment stopped. "Wow, well done, bed. That was some ride. I've got to go to sleep now." And so the bed wheeled back on, with normal friction, onto the floor of that upper room. And so Fritz went to sleep because he was really, really tired. It was dawn, but he thought he'd get a couple of hours. So the servant and the prince this time came into the castle, and they looked and looked. They couldn't find Fritz anywhere, and they went to the upper turret room, and they opened the door, and they saw the bed, and they saw Fritz lying there. "Oh no, the bed's got him," said the servant. "No, wait a minute," said the prince. "He's still breathing." And they shook him awake. And he said, "Oh, wow, that was amazing. The bed took me on this amazing journey throughout the castle, and I know where all the treasure is. It's great fun. But I'm still no nearer to learning what shivering and shaking's about." "Oh, that's such a pity, but you've broken the spell. You've given me my castle back. You know what? I think you should marry my sister. She's, say, if I die, then she and whoever marries her will be Prince and Princess of Bavaria after me. So, please, I'm going to bring you to meet her. She lives at the other side of the hill." "Oh, that's very nice, thank you." And strangely enough, Fritz and the princess got on fine. The princess seemed to be quite a simple, decent character, and she didn't have any airs and graces, and she was quite happy to marry Fritz. And so the prince eventually did pass away because he'd gotten to be an old man waiting for somebody to break the spell. And so Fritz and his wife became the rulers of Bavaria. And he always told his wife that the best thing she could ever do for him was to help him learn to shiver and shake. Well, the day after their coronation, the princess had a bright idea. She had seen Fritz going down to the local river to go fishing with some of the courtiers, and she thought, shiver and shake? Yes. And so Fritz was sitting back in their main sitting room, and the princess told her maids to take some of the fish that he'd caught and put it in a bucket of freezing cold water. And then she took the bucket and she tipped it right over Fritz's head. And the cold icy water and the slivery fish ran down the back of his neck and onto his back. And he thought, oh, I'm shivering and shaking. What did you do that for, my dear? When he turned to his wife, and she laughed and she said, Fritz, Prince Fritz of Bavaria, you can shiver and shake, and you didn't know it. Wonderful, said Fritz. Oh, thank you, my darling. You have solved the mystery. It's cold, but I'm shivering and shaking at last. And so the prince and the princess went on to live happy lives ever after. And that's the end of Shiver and Shake.